3.4 had a lot of lore, and none of which was voiced, so it was probably pretty hard to follow for most people. And it doesn't help that the little bottle lady speaks as though she expects you to already have context for all the weird stuff she says, which most of us did not have. So, in this video I will attempt to summarize all of the important bits in a more or less chronological order. However, there are technically two stories being told simultaneously, Jeht's and Liloupar's. That makes recapping the whole quest in one go a little difficult, so I'm going to split the recap into two parts. First, we're going to cover all the highlights surrounding Liloupar and Gurabad, and then we're going to rewind and focus on just Jeht and the Tanit. Also, please note that if you're watching this after version 3.4 ends, there either already is or soon will be a video covering the complete Sumeru timeline on my channel called The Beginner's Guide to Sumeru, which I do recommend watching as it will contain more detail than this video and place Liloupar's story contextually within the rest of Sumeru's history. Speaking of, let's start this video off with Liloupar's story, which will be super Liloupar-centric, meaning I'm stripping out all of the other stuff. Liloupar is a Jinn. She was born, as all Jinn were, from a lily that blossomed from the rivers created by the goddess of flowers after she was exiled from heaven. The Jinn have a lot of similarities to the Seelies, probably because their mother was supposedly a Seelie. Now, after the goddess of flowers befriended King Deshret, the two gods built a city for the Jinn in the desert called Ai-Khanum. As far as I can tell, this was a city exclusively for Jinn. Humans lived in similar city-states littered across the desert. After the goddess of flowers died while gifting some unknown power to King Deshret, the Jinn pledged their loyalty to him. He lied to them, saying that the goddess of flowers was sleeping eternally in the Oasis and that one day he would revive her. And they believed him, Liloupar especially. Around this time, a shepherd named Ormazd began uniting the people of the desert together under one banner, the Banner of Gurabad. King Deshret offered Ormazd and Gurabad his support by sending several Jinn to this capital and instructing them to assist in its construction while he ran off to work on the Golden Slumber, something I will not be doing a deep dive into in this video at this time because it's like a whole big rabbit hole on its own. Now, the two most important Jinn for our purposes were Ferraghese and Liloupar. Ferraghese appears to have been in charge of using her powers to ensure endless water would flow through these new waterways that the Jinn built. This allowed Gurabad to become a lush oasis paradise in the desert. Liloupar, on the other hand, despised this system of slavery found among the desert dwellers. As a race, Jinn took the most pride in their freedom, especially the freedom to feel, which was granted to them when they took on human-like forms. When stripped of that shape and instead placed into a machine or a bottle, they became not much more than slaves themselves. For this reason, Liloupar found the system of slavery among mortals to be rather repulsive. However, Liloupar believed Ormazd would free the desert people from slavery, and they fell in love with each other. They wed, and Liloupar became the immortal Jinn Queen of Gurabad. As time went on, Liloupar began to realize that Ormazd was nothing more than a tyrant and had no intention of eliminating slavery. She was furious at what she perceived to be a betrayal of her trust and feelings, and thus began to plot revenge against her husband. She had bore him many children, but she cursed in particular a daughter named Shirin. Ormazd was aware of this curse and therefore shunned his daughter, forbidding her from attending any family banquets and the like. Thus, Shirin grew up resentful of her father. Liloupar also bore a son named Kisra, whose father is unknown, and had him raised by the divine bird Gognus. Kisra grew up to be a hero, and his numerous exploits led to Ormazd adopting him and granting him Shirin's hand in marriage as a reward. All three of them were completely unaware that this had been Liloupar's plan all along. Shirin and Kisra were not in love, but they consented to the marriage as they both desired the throne. Not enough to commit mass murder over, but Liloupar had other ideas. She tricked Shirin into delivering poisoned honey to be served at a banquet for her father and 300 siblings, and of course they all died. Kisra took advantage of the event to seize the empty throne, but as Shirin realized what had happened, and by her hand, she began to lose her mind. And in this unstable state, she bore Kisra a son, Shiruya, who she would spoil to an unhealthy degree. Kisra, now also known by the name Parvez, then declared the abolition of all forms of slavery and became quite popular among the common folk. And sure, on the surface this appeared to be a great thing, but the thing is, Liloupar's ornate revenge against Ormazd did not end with his death. She took advantage of Kisra's desire for more power and designed machines powered by jinns that would replace the slave laborers entirely, and then she gifted those designs to Kisra in a dream. Kisra soon begins mass production of these machines, while Shirin takes charge of providing the jinn to power them by giving birth to them somehow. I'm not sure how, exactly. It's not ever stated anywhere. These Jinn were malformed and bound to the machines in ways that stripped them of their freedom. Their consciousnesses were shattered and fragmented, but they still had some level of self-awareness, and they resented Shirin for birthing them into such a miserable existence. They considered themselves slaves, and as a race that prided itself in its freedom, let's just say that their hatred and resentment began to fester. Liloupar's sister, Ferraghese, saw what Liloupar was doing to her family and to the people, and she grew quite frightened, and rightly so. Now, unable or perhaps unwilling to stop her sister herself, she decided to become the guardian of the entrance to the eternal oasis where the goddess of flowers slept, forever restricting Liloupar's access to it. But since this meant leaving her post at the waterways, the endless waters of Gurabad would begin to run dry over time. So the Jinn machines did their job and successfully removed the need for slave labor. And that seemed to be a good thing at the time, except that, as they would all find out, this also removed the need for any human labor, not just slave labor. So with no reason to care for people who weren't earning them money, former slave owners had no incentive to care for the people, and laborers no longer had a means to earn a living. This led to a great period of civil unrest. Meanwhile, Shirin was tormented by past deeds and by the cries of her enslaved Jinn children. Her one source of solace was her son Shiruya, but when he reached adulthood, Kisra banished him from Gurabad, fearful that his son would overthrow him. Shirin was already furious with him, and kind of unstable as it was, so it should surprise no one that she began to plot to kill her husband, just like her mother. To do this, Shirin covertly assisted Shiruya in gathering the suffering common folk and former slaves who had been displaced by the Jinn machines, and whilst disguised beneath a brass mask, Shiruya was able to lead those people in rebellion against his father. The rebellion itself was brutal. Somehow the malformed Jinn within the machines were freed, and they ravaged the people of Gurabad in revenge for their imprisonment. And while all of this was happening, Liloupar decided to lend the rebellion a hand by leveraging the power of the Abyss and unleashing a terrible black plague upon the city. The details here are a bit unclear, but it seems to be similar to abyssal corruption, as King Kisra was transformed into a dark monster by it. Now, in all honesty, though, the details here are really murky. Just know that Gurabad had this crazy rebellion, a plague, and then fell through a crack in the earth, not necessarily in that order. These events killed over half of the population, and the survivors were dispersed. It was around this time that Deshret finally returned from his work on the Golden Slumber, and while having been exposed to the effects of the Abyss and therefore slowly starting to lose his mind, he wasn't completely lost yet. He was, however, furious at the state of Gurabad and what Liloupar had done. So, he tore her into 7 pieces, instructing 7 sages to hide each of her segments in different locations as punishment. And then she would sleep for several thousand years. Which brings us to Jeht. Jeht is the daughter of a desert mercenary, Jibril, and an academia scholar, Ufera. Oddly enough, she grew up in the rainforest, and her first taste of desert life came when another scholar, Tirzad, hired her and her father as bodyguards and guides on one of his academic expeditions. Now, Tirzad held a rather prejudiced belief that the desert folk were all barbaric and that King Deshret had ruled as a tyrant. He wanted to find some concrete proof of his claims, but after discovering the primal construct Benben, his claims were actually proven false. King Deshret was actually a benevolent god who did what he thought was best for the people. Now, during their journey, Jeht learns more about her mother's research, and why her father left his tribe to begin with to be with her. Turns out that the tribe was trying to unleash King Deshret's biggest mistake, the Golden Slumber, and Ufera's notes were the key to doing so. When they finally unlocked Kaj Nasut, one of the tribesmen that had been antagonizing them, Samael, sat upon the throne and died. His mind was absorbed into the Golden Slumber. Jeht, Jabril, Tirzad, and the Traveler managed to escape successfully, but Jabril went back willingly to be absorbed by the Golden Slumber, claiming that if he left it unchecked, Samael could obtain an obscene amount of power and cause untold disaster. Tirzad was greatly humbled by his experiences in the desert and wrote about them when he returned to the academia. Jeht, however, took Benben and wandered deeper into the desert. She found her father's old tribe, the Tanit, and was taken in by their leader, Matriarch Babel. Now, since Jeht's mother wasn't from the desert, she was considered a half outsider, so she worked very hard in carrying out Babel's orders, unsavory as they were, so that she would be accepted by this place that she wanted to call home. By the time the Traveler arrived, Babel had already asked Jeht to find this place called the Eternal Oasis, the place where the body of the Goddess of Flowers lied. Babel believed this place to be some kind of paradise in the desert, and also the key to uniting the people of the desert one last time into one big happy family. Gurabad 2.0. The hunt for the Eternal Oasis began with Jeht, Azuriq, and the Traveler locating Liloupar, or at least one of her 7 pieces. Liloupar took an immediate liking to the Traveler and made a pact with them. We'll talk about her attitude a little bit more towards Jeht later, but yes, she's basically a bitter and abrasive little rat in a bottle for the entire journey, and particularly hostile, not towards Jeht necessarily, but towards Babel. As luck would have it, Liloupar also wanted to go to the Eternal Oasis to see the Goddess of Flowers, so she cooperated. But in order to help the Traveler and Jeht, she needed to find her other 6 segments. During the hunt, she continuously berated Jeht for having no self-awareness and for being far too trusting, and soon enough, Azuriq shows his true colors by demanding they hand over Liloupar to him. He had planned to take over the matrilineal Tanit tribe by marrying Jeht, and had even willingly colluded with the Fatui, which should be how he knew how to operate the Ruin Golem, I think. So this was another instance of betrayal, so Jeht killed him and navigated the sewers of Gurabad to find the Eternal Oasis, which was guarded by Liloupar's sister Ferraghese, who the Traveler then killed so that they could enter. It's a lot of death. It's a very bloody quest. Inside the Eternal Oasis, Liloupar was distraught to realize that King Deshret had lied to all of the Jinn. The Goddess of Flowers hadn't been sleeping here at all. Jeht took some time to leave her father's axe and her mother's notes behind as a memorial before returning back to Babel. Bad vibes all around, so Jeht asked the Traveler to help her get Ben fixed, since he'd previously run out of battery, which led to the discovery that more Tanit were involved with the Fatui. Joy. Babel then ordered Jeht to kill the Traveler so that she could take Liloupar for herself, since, Jinn can only be separated from their masters in death. But Jeht refused, so after the Traveler left, Babel gave Jeht to the Fatui for some human experimentation fun times, and told Jeht that the Traveler betrayed them, and that's why she's getting sent off. Babel then told the Traveler when they came back that Jeht betrayed the tribe instead, and upon investigating, the Traveler found Jeht on a murderous Fatui killing rampage. She eventually calmed down, and together she and the Traveler realized that Babel had decided to kill them both, using each other. So they confronted her instead. Now Babel tried to win Jeht over one more time, but it was kinda pointless. One long battle later, the Tanit were all but decimated, and Babel declared Jeht a traitor to all desert tribes. Apparently, she'd already alerted them all to Jeht's actions, and Jeht could no longer find any home anywhere in the desert. But Jeht kills Babel regardless and takes Ben with her on a new solo journey, and no one knows where to. Will we meet Jeht again? Who knows? But if we do, I hope we don't have to kill her, because it kind of feels like that's the direction we're going. And okay, that's enough, recap for now. It's time for the not-so-rapid-fire roundup, because I have a little bit of some post-quest thoughts that I want to share in no particular order, so we're going to start off with the relationship between Liloupar and Jeht. Now, after Jeht's quest, there are a couple of optional quests wherein you can find Liloupar's last segment, as well as the sunken gates of Gurabad. Once whole, Liloupar falls silent and never speaks again. Now, I've seen a lot of comments about how Liloupar is horribly racist, and to an extent, there's a lot of truth in that. But the racism in this specific case is actually more of a side effect of another viewpoint entirely that I think people overlook, so I kind of want to talk about that. I mentioned earlier in Liloupar's story that the Jinn took great pride in their sense of freedom. To be imprisoned was really unforgivable, and that was a view that they imposed on humans as well. And this is part of why Liloupar felt Ormaz's betrayal so strongly. He had never had any intention of abolishing a system of slavery in the desert. The Jinn, being a rather volatile and emotional race, take their revenge schemes to the most extreme points they possibly can, hence her multi-generational scheme. So when the Traveler and Jeht woke Liloupar up, she had been sleeping for thousands of years, and as far as she was concerned, the people of the desert hadn't changed at all since the last time she woke up. She was looking down on them for willingly being slaves, perpetuating a system where they were not free. This is why she calls Jeht a slave so many times. She doesn't hate the desert people as a race necessarily, she just thinks, misguidedly, that the desert folk are only capable of systemic slavery because that's all she's ever witnessed. Is that correct? No, it's not, obviously. Now, her attitude towards Jeht does change slowly over time as she watches Jeht fight for her autonomy and prove her free will. She does try to slowly guide Jeht towards the truth in her own cryptic way, and I think that's why Jeht doesn't really hate Liloupar by the end of the questline. I think Jeht understood the intentions in some form. Is Liloupar still racist and pretty classist? Yeah, a little bit. But nuances are really important when it comes to building bridges of understanding and progress. If you take nothing else from their relationship, I hope you take that. Now, it's ironic to me that Jinn pride themselves in their freedom when they pledge themselves freely to their masters. But they do say that a Jinn has to choose the master can't choose the Jinn. So I guess there's freedom of choice in that way. But Liloupar recognized the Traveler as her master. Now, Liloupar was also a Jinn that was sealed in a bottle by King Deshret, which should make him quite similar to the biblical character of Solomon, who did the exact same thing, sealed Jinn in bottles. Now, curiously, Liloupar associates the Traveler with her master, physically, like the Traveler looks like her master. And since her master is different from her mistress, we can only assume that the master is King Deshret and not the goddess of flowers. In other words, the Traveler looks like King Deshret. And given that the gods of Teyvat, like Archons, all bear the names of demons from the Lesser Key of Solomon, which is basically just a list of all the Jinn and demons that he subjugated, it makes you wonder what type of being Deshret really was. I mean, he was already so powerful that Celestia just offered him a gnosis, presumably, and he was like, "Nah, fam, I don't need your trinkets," and just kind of went about his day. And if the Traveler is like him physically, then I wonder if the reverse is true and that Deshret is like the Traveler physically. In other words, is Deshret a descender? Is that actually what they meant when they called him the son of the sky? I don't know, it's food for thought. I want to look into it later, but not right now. Moving right along, I want to talk a little bit about the Aranara, which seems like a weird thing to talk about because we're not even in the rainforest. But anyway, Rukkhadevata made the Aranara using knowledge that was taught to her by the goddess of flowers. And you know, the Aranara are kind of Rukkhadevata's familiars, you know? So comparatively, the Jinn are like the goddess of flowers familiars, right? And if we just assume that the familiars reflect aspects of their charges, we are suddenly left with a very, particularly yikes picture of what the goddess of flowers was really like on the inside. I have nowhere else I'm going with that. I just wanted to share. And the last thing I wanted to talk about was the Eternal Oasis. Now, I'm kind of speculating a little bit because it's not super clear in the lore that we have currently, but it appears as though the Goddess of Flowers originally created a magnificent Patisara garden where she and the Jinn lived before Deshret arrived. This is kind of implied to be the Eternal Oasis, but it's also kind of implied that Deshret either rebuilt this garden from his memories, and therefore that's what became the Eternal Oasis, or that he contained the Patisara garden in this weird subspace field that he set below ground. In other words, it's his fault that the garden is frozen in time. Now, it's heavily implied that he did this by leveraging the power of a celestial nail, which has some weird implications because if you think about it for a second, a celestial nail being able to literally stop time, what does that mean for all of these other places where we see celestial nails? Also, fun fact, if you solve all the puzzles in here, one of the thrones actually blossoms with flowers. And that throne does not belong to the goddess of flowers, as you would think it would, since it would be her garden, technically. The throne actually belongs to Deshret, and that feels significant. Oh, also, the 3 thrones here have names on them. That's how we know whose throne is whose. One of them says Nabu Malikata, which is the moniker of the goddess of flowers, and also another name for the Queen of Sheba, but that's another thing entirely. Oh, but she did have a lot of relations with Solomon, so hence Deshret, Solomon, goddess of flowers, Queen of Sheba, love it. Anyway, the other one is obviously Rukkhadevata, and yeah, I mean Rukkhadevata and not Kusanali, meaning Irminsul could not update this place. This place is outside of Irminsul's reach. Makes you wonder what else is outside of Irminsul's reach, because it doesn't seem to be completely ubiquitous, you know? Anyway, guys, that's it for me for today. I'm sorry if the visuals were a little bit lackluster for this video. It's really hard to find good footage for things that happened off screen like thousands of years ago. I do my best. Anyway, thank you to all of these lovely channel members for their support in helping me make these videos possible, and thanks to every single one of you out there for watching. You're all the best. Now, I am impatiently waiting for 3.5 to get here so I can finally get all the sand out of my shoes. I'll see you guys on the flip side, though. Take care.